one's not the aggressor and the other's the victim. That doesn't play into it. It's just an effort to force an outcome to negotiations. I don't think that will produce a result. And therefore, again, if somebody's going to be blamed, I fear the most likely target of the failure of this effort to try and stop the war will be Ukraine. And so the flow of
Yeah.
aid to Ukraine will be cut off, and Russia will do whatever it's able to do.
Donald Trump, we remember, he did promise, didn't he? He would sort out the war in Ukraine in just one day.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
How would you settle that war in one day?
Because I'll meet with Putin, I'll meet with Zelensky. They both have weaknesses and they both have strengths. And within 24 hours, that war will be settled. It'll be over. It'll be absolutely over.
Do you want Ukraine to win this war?
I don't think in terms of winning and losing. I think in terms of getting it settled so we stop killing all these people and breaking down this country.
So let us get the thoughts of Ambassador John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Welcome to you, Ambassador.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Always good to have you with us, Ambassador. I mean, you've said often enough, you said it to me more than once, you've been really worried about the idea of Donald Trump's regaining the White House. Well, now it has happened. The American people, the voters, felt differently to you. What are your thoughts today?
Well, I think a second Trump term is going to be a lot like the first Trump term, except worse. And I think Ukraine is a good example of it. What he just said about solving the war in one day is absolutely impossible. But I think the failure of that to happen will not be Donald Trump's fault, because it's never Donald Trump's fault. It'll be the fault of either Zelensky or Putin. And the odds are, given the history here, that it'll turn out to be Zelensky's fault in Trump's mind. And that will have very negative consequences for U.S. aid to Ukraine, for NATO's continued involvement, and in fact, the continued involvement of the U.S. in NATO.
And your calculation then is that the new president, the returned president, will simply starve Ukraine of the necessary aid to force them to the table and present them with the very real prospect of a very imminent defeat. That's your judgment.
Well, his advisors have said in the past couple of months that they would basically go to Ukraine and say, "Look, you either get serious negotiations going, or we'll cut off all aid." And then they would turn to the Russians and say, you either get serious negotiations going, or we'll do something, not quite clear what, increase sanctions, as if the two parties are equally complicit in the causes of the war, equally at fault. That there's no distinction between them. One's not the aggressor and the other's the victim. That doesn't play into it. It's just an effort to force an outcome to negotiations. I don't think that will produce a result. And therefore, again, if somebody's going to be blamed, I fear the most likely target of the failure of this effort to try and stop the war will be Ukraine. And so the flow of
Yeah.
aid to Ukraine will be cut off, and Russia will do whatever it's able to do.
And what then would be your advice if you were there at the table at the moment, having regular contact with other ambassadors, with NATO ambassadors, with heads of state around Europe, especially those who are near to that NATO border, flanking Russia? Would you suggest they should up their contribution? They should pour more money into defence, into their NATO defences to compensate for America? Is that even possible, given the strength of support which currently comes from America?
Well, I think the circumstances in Europe are such that if Trump effectively collapses American resolve to aid Ukraine, other countries in Europe will welcome that. That it's a possibility now to turn the page, and so I'm very worried about the outcome in Ukraine. But I think on the broader question, we've already seen today President Macron of France has apparently tweeted out that now is the time to create a European army. I mean, I'm summarizing what he said. And look, if people in Europe want NATO destroyed, if they really want to provoke Trump to withdraw, go ahead and talk about creating a European army, and good luck with that.
Yeah, I mean, look, in the past again, you suggested again more than once that you believe that given a second chance in the White House, that Donald Trump would actually seek to withdraw America from NATO. The ultimate step it would be a huge step. Do you still believe that is realistically possible, that he might seek to accomplish that?
I think it's a very real possibility. He tried to do it. He came very close to doing it in his first term, and I think when you look at the list of aggravations and complaints that Trump has about Europe, which just continue to grow kind of day by day, one thing that is still very much on his mind, and which some of his advisors have advocated, is withdrawal. And I think that would be a catastrophic mistake, but I think it's certainly something that he would think as appropriate. He having no philosophy, having very little strategic knowledge or interest at all, frankly, he views this as somewhat of an oversimplification, but not much.
Mm.
He thinks we're defending Europe out of the goodness of our hearts, and that they don't pay us for it. So really, what are we getting? Why are we doing this? And if you look at the world that way, transactionally, which is the way Trump looks at pretty much everything, then the Europeans' failure is in and of itself reason to get out.
Oh, you'll know that some of those who support Donald Trump argue that, yes, he is very unpredictable. They then suggest that is actually a strength, that leaders like Vladimir Putin, potential adversaries, leaders around the world, never know what Donald Trump might do next. And keeping them guessing may be to the advantage of the US and the Western alliance. I wonder, how do you address that argument?
Well, I think it's simple-minded to begin with. Look, uh, if you want to have alliances, which people generally think is a good thing, better to have allies than not to have allies. Uh, the allies themselves and the United States need to know with certainty what our strategic objectives are, what we're prepared to devote to it, whether we can count on each other. This is a pattern of behavior that's built up over time. So,
Mm.
being completely unpredictable is not a way to strengthen your alliance structure.
Yeah.
Tactical surprise to the enemy, absolutely, and keeping them guessing what you will do at any given moment, very important. But even with adversaries, to establish deterrence, they have to know with certainty what the consequences would be if they cross one of our red lines.
Yeah.
And so you can play this game about keeping the enemy guessing. I think what it says to Putin, Xi Jinping, and others is that Trump doesn't know what he's doing.
Right. There are also some of those close to Donald Trump who argue that it's within the president's power to mold services of the United States federal government in his image. They talk about sacking civil servants wholesale, putting in loyalists, Trump loyalists. And I guess in their view, as part of the plan they've set out in draft, that also goes for high-level military commanders. It is in the power, Ambassador, isn't it, of the president to appoint who he chooses to be chiefs of the military staff, including the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Is it possible that it would be in his power to choose very loyal, high-ranking officers, generals and admirals, to serve his will militarily in a way that he was not able to do before?
Well, it is certainly the president's decision to appoint senior military leaders, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the combatant commanders of the key commands, key agencies within the Defense Department, the National Security Agency, for example, which does electronic intelligence and that sort of thing. Those are nominees that he sends to the Senate, requires confirmation, and they all come back, if they're confirmed, with certificates, just like these in back of me, that say they serve at the pleasure of the president for the time being. That's what they say. That's job security for you in our system. Uh, the question is whether the president would do this in a way that is disruptive to military discipline and good order. The
Yeah.
problem with Trump is he doesn't understand how this is done to begin with. I urged him repeatedly during my time at the White House when a combatant command, for example, was coming up for a new commander, and he had to make that nomination. Ask the Defense Department to submit 3 or 4 generals, admirals, flag officers who might be qualified for that job,
Yeah.
and then let us look at them at the White House and select them. He never did that. So when he complains all these people get appointed and he can't understand how it happens, it's because he let it happen.
Yeah, I mean, I was speaking earlier on to one of the most loyal supporters of the president-elect. His name is Sebastian Gorka. You may know him. And I was putting to him some of the testimony that we've heard from senior figures who were previously very close to Donald Trump in his first presidency, involving the use of the military. His former defense secretary was, I think, who testified that during protests outside the White House, Donald Trump asked the military if they could intervene, use military force against protesters. I think it was suggested, allegedly, that he said, well, why not use live ammunition, aim at the protesters' legs? Well, Sebastian Gorka said that was great bias on my part, that I was at the same time talking about witnesses who could not be believed, and I was biased to raise the mere suggestion. Was that a credible account? Can you in any way corroborate that sort of story?
Well, I was not there at the time, but I think that's what former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper wrote in his book and has said publicly. And I've known Esper for probably 30 years. I think he's telling the truth. I think that sounds like Donald Trump. I wasn't there personally, as I say, but it sounds entirely credible to me.
And if the president, in his second term, obviously this is a hypothesis, proposed using military force against protesters, there is the instrument of the Insurrection Act, would the military be willing to go along with that? They'd have little choice but to take orders from the commander-in-chief, wouldn't they?
Well, either that or be prepared to be fired. And this is the kind of constitutional crisis that I think we need to worry about in a second Trump term. It applies in departments like the Defense Department, like the Justice Department, when Trump says, go prosecute Mr. X, and the career prosecutors say there's no evidence, no basis on which to prosecute Mr. X. So I don't know exactly how this would play out. I think there will be a number of iterations before it really reaches crisis proportions. But if Trump forces the issue, then I think we will have a constitutional crisis.
Well, I was keen to get your view on that subject. We will see. We will see when and if that question actually arises. Last question, very, very briefly if I can. I know you have taken a pretty tough line when it comes to policy towards Iran. Well, Donald Trump has been also pretty tough in his attitude towards Iran. Do you have something in common there? Are you welcoming the idea of a tougher line?
Look, I think somebody needs to destroy Iran's nuclear weapons program. I felt this for a long time, either that or change the regime. I think Bibi Netanyahu now has an opportunity to do it during the transition period until our inauguration on January the 20th. I think he should take advantage of it. This is a threat to the whole world. It's not just a threat to Israel or the Gulf Arab nations. A nuclear Iran has the capability of giving nuclear weapons to terrorists. This is something we should avoid. I think Israel can do it.